All right, plan is put on some Jimi Hendrix, do some Metamodern Yoga, probably end up dancing for some of it. So maybe I'll comment a little bit on some of the moves here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stretch the other shoulder. I kind of did this on the left side. The idea here is normally you'd think I'd be sort of wanting to stretch out sort of longer. That's the normal way, and I do that. But it's important to counterbalance that by sort of going toward the out longer, identifying the resistance to it, strengthening the resistance, and letting it reverse. Instead of going longer, it's shorter, strengthening it, learning from it, and giving love to it. And then you go back and forth between the long and the short, and you get some progress. And then more generally, what I'm doing mostly right now is a sort of fire technique, where the idea is find what feels the worst in a moment of experience, label that a mistake according to whatever I'm currently aiming at, a sin based on which target I'm aiming at. Then the idea is to deduce the alternative target for which that would not be a sin but a victory, and intensify that activated dynamic in the body, giving it love, and intensifying it, and learning and sort of yielding to the pressure that comes into the organism when you intensify that error signal. So that's what I've generally been doing. An opposite reaction. Yeah, I'll put on some shorts. Turn that off. Maybe I'll leave the music off for a minute here and see if I feel like commenting. And the knees should suffice, perhaps. All right. So fire is the spirit of, does it hurt? Fine, we'll make it hurt even more. Water is for cowards. Water makes you weak. We are going to do up downs until so-and-so is no longer tired and thirsty. Now you can do that move with or without love. If you do it without love, then you yank part of the subconscious into the domain of the conscious and have it under your control. And if you iterate on this process, you can expand the borders of your consciously controllable organism, including the emotions, which is wonderful. However, if you do it without love, then there builds up a friction between the conscious and the subconscious. They do not work together well. Fire is also the domain of the shadow. And learning fire techniques means learning not just to integrate the shadow, but to deliberately enlarge it, or strengthen it, or darken it. Because once you become comfortable with integration, disintegration is no longer such a concern, is it? So if you're really good, if you really practice shadow work a lot, like is the current paradigm, then like, hey, if you're really good at it, why not? Give yourself a challenge, undo some of it, or make new shadow. Here, I'll do a neck stretch. I'm going to do the same technique. So I'm going to be stretching away, but then I'm going to be letting that bring it in towards compression, sort of in an opposite, the shadow of stretching. And what? The only other thing I want to say is throughout the move, there's the giving of the love and there's the emotional content that Bruce Lee talks about. So the whole body, like maybe there's this one point I'm focusing on, the point of greatest error signal in the current paradigm. But the whole body is supposed to sort of come and participate that, and not just the physical, the emotions, the emotional content. And then of course I'm doing the mental. So let's try this way. I'm stretching away. That's the activation, that's the intent. But then I'm going to detect the error in that. I'm going to lose to it and strengthen it and let it bring me away from the stretching thing and into its shadow, which should provide for integration and frankly more flexibility in the long run. Yeah, if you get flexible and then unflexible and then reflexible and you iterate on that, then you don't just get flexibility, you get integration. You need a good relationship with the conscious and subconscious because you want to be able to juxtapose the conscious activation in order to generate the error signal. But then you need to rely on the subconscious to some degree to meet that handshake on the other side. Although you kind of prompt it, you give it permission, but then you kind of need it to be able to say, hey, what is an error signal according to the current paradigm is an accuracy signal in some other paradigm. But then you don't spend a month getting flexible and a month getting inflexible. Well, maybe I'll do that eventually. Changing the frequency of oscillation can be important. But an insight that comes out of the back and forth is, well, then why not do it in the middle of the stretch? Stretch, compress, stretch, error signal, strengthen, surrender. Emotional content. So you strengthen it physically, you lend the whole body and heart to it, and you allow it not just to induce a physical error signal, but also an emotional one, which you strengthen. But if you just strengthen and strengthen it, it's just going to say wrong, 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 louder, louder, louder. That'll be more and more painful. That's why it's essential to have the juxtaposition with the sort of subconscious shadow paradigm, according to which the error signal is not an error at all, but a success. Let's try here. Using my other hand could help with helping me remember to do emotional content. In Buddhism, there isn't much of an emphasis on stacking intentions, but I think there's something very valuable in learning to stack multiple intentions, at which point you run into the problem of sort of memory or keeping multiple things instantiated at the same time. And then it's good to have mnemonic devices, memory helpers that says, I could put a necklace on and say that was my necklace of positive emotional content. And then when I did the exercise, the necklace would help me, my subconscious, instantiate the necessary pattern. And so then you get into the realm of symbols, rituals, icons, and so forth. This is also why your metaphysical, ontological, religious, or non-religious worldview matters so much, because it's what fills in the blanks for your subconscious when you're apprehending novel sensory information. And you can only process it with principles and rigorous things so far. So the rest has to be done subconsciously. And then the question is, well, I don't know. I never see how my subconscious makes these judgment calls, so to speak. And it's like, well, that's too bad, because a lot of religious traditions, the thing that doesn't make any sense consciously is extremely, let's say, enriching. I don't know if it's true necessarily, but it's extremely enriching subconsciously. When your conscious worldview is made of A, B, and C, your subconscious interpretation of novel sensory data can be optimized. Yeah. You see a kid yank on something with his whole body. That's because he's got emotional content, like Bruce Lee's talking about. But which emotion? And that's why you have to embed yourself in a narrative so that the narrative can dictate the emotional content. Not because it matters which emotional content is right or wrong, but because you need the emotional content at all to integrate everything else. It's another way that people can subtly misunderstand things and think they're stupid when they're not. It's like, well, anyway. The hypothesis I'm kind of developing today is take how Bruce Lee goes from explosion to exhaustion on an emote. So there's a scene in the movie where he stomps a man to death, and he starts with this, attacking scream, and then he just keeps going. It just keeps going and going, and it goes from strong and vicious to weaker and weaker until it falls silent. But you say, why stay on that track once you know that it's shifting over to weakness instead of strength? There's wisdom in going from explosion to exhaustion and everything in between. And so my theory a little bit is you want to stack that with something like anything you want to be able to explode with, you want to be able to sort of do it on a full inhale and a full exhale. The idea being, if I have a very empty lungs and I'm doing the explosion thing, it's one way it goes. And I have very full lungs and I do it, that's another way it goes. They're not exactly the same. You can be good at one and not good at the other, but you want to be good at all of them. So you go all the way from inhale to exhale. And you want to both, let the subconscious assert itself in a new paradigm, open up the shadow. You do it with love. Now you've got wonderful flow, not just territory conquered, but flow back and forth between conscious and subconscious, which is the real point. That's another error, is you think it's about whether the territory is here or there, and it's like, no, it's the flow of when it changes from here to there to the next place and continues to change. And the more change, the more coherent, meaningful change, the more processing the thing does. So full breath in and out on strengthening the error signal, yielding to how it shapes you. Full emotional content. It's good to bring the vocal apparatus in to some degree. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to actually make a sound, but you want to sort of have it right there. It's good to practice whispering. So, for example, you also want to oscillate between sort of expanding the ribcage and compressing it. Whichever one of those you want to have, you'll probably have a habit of leaning biased in that direction. But that inhibits your ability to advance in that direction. You have to go back and forth, even if what you want is in a particular direction. So, whatever you're doing, do the opposite. Integrate the opposite with what you were originally doing. Don't make the mistake of thinking what you were originally doing was all wrong. Rather, doing only that, doing only any one thing all the time is what's really wrong. As long as you're changing, adapting, and growing, it barely matters if you make mistakes along the way. Every time it cracks, I switch. So I go, to expanding, and then I go to letting it come in and compress based on the cracks. I don't want to do too many cracks in a row. It sort of is like a waste. So if you watch that scene where Bruce Lee goes all the way from the explosion in the voice to the very end and say, okay, then what if he did it on the inhale and fully expressed some emotional content that sort of balanced out what he just finished expressing fully on the exhale. And then when he finished the inhale, he could move on to another exhale. And so it cycles back and forth between opposites. If you don't do that, because it is very counterintuitive to train vocalization on the inhale, it's more the realm of metal fingers. It's very difficult. If you practice always with the explosive, normal use of the voice, which Bruce Lee may well have been doing, and not doing the opposite shadow, well, the bias, I feel, manifests right in his voice. The timbre of his voice has been shaped by this pattern of behavior, and the emphasis on the exhale more than the inhale means that his voice has a certain tendency towards extra energy, makes it a little bit less sharp, makes it. I would sometimes think of this as a little bit like flooding a circuit with extra energy. And on the other hand, if you practiced on the inhale, then you'd get more of this vocal fry type thing. And so these are two opposites, the vocal fry and then the more solid sort of a thing. And Bruce Lee's is in this direction, just as Frank Young's is. Even farther, much farther than Bruce, in fact. And then if you do the opposite, and I can do this even on the exhale. If I just bring the inhale vocalization into it in imagination, that already by itself goes a decent way toward giving the advantages. But then it's more something I'm doing and have to be sort of well warmed up and so forth to do. It's like what singers and other performers do is they briefly enter flow states and then they leave because their body doesn't do that except when they make it do that. And they can't make it do that except with singing. That's why they became singers. It was their passion. It was the one thing they could use to open up that dialogue between subconscious and conscious and enter flow states with lots of processing happening at the periphery. And even then, they can't always do it. Sometimes they're very inspired and their performances are gorgeous. And sometimes it eludes them and they don't know why the muse is so fickle. But this is some hint at why the muse is so fickle. If it's something you're doing, then the body isn't just chronically in a state of doing it for you. The degree of integration more or less corresponds to the degree of default, like background processing, output and efficiency. Output and efficiency together is that sort of Fristonian elegance that understands that, yes, you want to get more, but there's a cost. And so you don't actually want to aim for everything. You want to aim for as much as you can get for as little expended resources so that you can expend them somewhere else, getting even more. And how well you do this shapes the periphery of your grip upon the moment. That's basically what your brain is doing. But your brain also has to instantiate the opposite. It's not your brain reaching out to relate to the world. On one level it is, but what's actually going on in the brain is one part of the brain is the world you perceive. What you perceive to be the world. There's a real world out there, but you can't perceive it directly. Instead, what you perceive is what your brain generates based off of physical phenomena that get turned into sensory signals by the body. So that's why it touches on the same things, like the ritual, the icon, etc., for shaping how the subconscious relates to it, because that's also something you want to sort of Fristonian elegantly grip. Do you even really want the truest possible answer for how your subconscious relates to mediating between you and the environment? Or do you want the elegant thing that 80/20s it, or iteratively 80/20s it, right? That's the real magic. That's how you make real progress. The iterative 80/20ing, more and more elegant, so that you can distribute resources up at different scales. So you can have your base layer of just how, for example, the skin somehow turns everything happening in the real world into, sensations or signals that get passed to the nervous system, and the nervous system processes them and delivers them to the brain. And only then do you look out from your body and be like, here it is. And it's like, well, this is a very processed version of it. And if you can do more and more of that processing, that's what we call being in a flow state. And if you want to do that all the time, then you have to make it something your body does by itself, not something you have to consciously do. And that means you have to have the relationship between the conscious and subconscious working together. And you have to pass it up and down the layers of resolution. Um, and then, and this is what Peterson's talking about a lot of the time when he was with Joe Rogan talking about Kundalini yoga, because he's practiced it for 15 years with his wife. And, most people think of Peterson in political terms, but physically, he's got great posture, he's in good shape. He's got a fair amount of energy, it seems. Um, and he does Kundalini yoga, and he says it helps, so probably it does. And what he says, Joe Rogan asks, he says, hey, people who do a lot of that say they get psychedelic experiences without drugs, just in the body. Have you had that? And Peterson says, no. But what I will say is when you do that, everything becomes psychedelic. That I think he's saying the body just becomes in a sort of chronically psychedelic state. And that basically is what flow is. Flow states are mild psychedelic states. And if you turn them up really intensely, you're getting more and more into what a psychedelic experience is like. And that's because psychedelic experiences don't just inject you with some random drug induced nothing signal. They act upon the pre existing structures and processes of your body. They work with them. Your body does certain things, and it does the same things it normally does, except slightly altered, and in particular, faster, more processing, flowier states, same thing as psychedelic states. And Peterson is saying you can get sort of chronic flow. That's sort of the idea through Kundalini yoga. Just as some people in more intense cases have full-blown psychedelic experiences through Kundalini yoga. Many people would assume that these people are more advanced. I'm more inclined to think that they build up a strong sort of DC current charge that can't go to where it needs to go. And they just make it stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and suddenly it explodes. And then they think they've done some amazing thing. And it's like, the whole bit where you like made this really big imbalance because that was the only way to be able to connect heaven and earth, like head to the base of the spine. Like maybe you need to work on having less friction in between there so you don't have to build up so much pressure and turn it into this volcano thing. Can't it be more of a chronic integrated thing where you just have more flow states instead of normal interspersed with crazy psychedelic experiences? And think of an AC/DC comparison here. That's very interesting. Maybe it's less about moving energy from one spot to another and more about the back and forth that increases total processing. It's not about the movement of energy at all. It's not that this spot needs to have more energy. It's that in the course of energy moving, information processing occurs. But if you're thinking in terms of DC and you want, more and more and more and more energy, you think the energy is the thing. And it's like, no, it's the processing done through the energy that's the thing. And you get to feel that from the inside. And you get to have a more thoroughly processed experience. It's flow. It's a flow state. It's what you already have. When your 1% best performances and mood and all of it, when it all comes together just right in your flow state, like you could have that all the time. In some sense, that's what you're striving for, And it's like, is it the right answer? The thing you've seen before? And it's like, well, no, it's not the end of the road. Maybe there is no end of the road, but if you get there, if your 1% becomes your average, then you will be such a, smarter version of yourself who can look with new eyes, smarter eyes, to try to figure out what the real right target is. And that'll still be wrong. But if you actually get there toward, your new self's 1% state, then you'll have much better eyes to see forward again and find ways to more or less become more and more efficient at doing more and more information processing efficaciously and sustainably and wholesomely across time in a way that doesn't explode or plateau, but in a way that can sustain itself. And then we say, wait, maybe that's the whole game then. It's not trying to get the target. You think it's about, oh, I wish I knew what the real target to aim at was, but this is my best guess. Now I'll improve my guess. It's like, not really. That's part of it, but that's not the whole point of it. No, it's that you use the target in order to go through a transformational process that puts you in more and more chronic flow states. But in relationship with the environment, that's what seems to be missing in Buddhism. In Buddhism, you have permanent flow states of the most intense variety, but not in intertwined relationship with the environment, with the shallowest possible intertwining. That achieves certain things, but you can see that it hasn't achieved solving all of our world problems. We don't go to the enlightened geniuses of the world and say, hey, how do we solve the energy crisis? They have no idea. So they have these permanent flow states, but it doesn't allow them to be like who? Like, I don't know, Elon Musk. Like, you imagine, oh, if Elon Musk got enlightened, he'd be much more effective. And wouldn't that be wonderful? He'd be wise and loving and all that. And it's like, well, no, if he became enlightened, he wouldn't be Elon Musk anymore. That's the whole thing, right? So he wouldn't do that. Or if he did, he would do it differently and maybe even better, but not like Elon Musk as he is, plus enlightenment. Instead, it'll be more like different. Because there's not that intertwining with reality, that surface area. And yes, that exposes you to suffering, which is why Buddhism gets rid of it. But it also exposes the world to you. And so if you allow the world to write on you, the world will allow you to write on it. And the degree to which that is already what you do and is the essence of your doing and being and becoming, and everything's doing and becoming, because that's the burning bush too. The becoming that is becoming, what it will become, but not the thing it is or the thing it will be. The process between them, the processing itself, the movement itself. And so the bush burns with flame but is not consumed. It's not consumed because it doesn't need to be hot to be fire. That's an interesting idea. Like that's an interesting. It's in the Prince of Egypt when Moses he actually chooses to touch the fire. It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Ten Commandments. That was an interesting idea that the Disney or DreamWorks people had. They're like, hey, what if he like touched the fire and it didn't burn him? Doesn't burn the bush, doesn't burn him. It's not because the bush is invulnerable. It's because the fire is not burning, not a consuming thing. Except elsewhere in the Bible, it does specifically say that the glory of God is a consuming fire. So there's the fire that consumes and the fire that doesn't. And the bush, there is something about the bush that resists being consumed, perhaps. And I wonder if this has any relationship with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Because why can't we go eat the tree of the fruit of the tree of life? And the answer is, well, there's an angel with a flaming sword keeping us from doing it. The literal interpretation of this is at some point a long time ago, there was an actual garden and then there was an angel with a sword. It's like, okay. And then it went away at some point. Like, I want to hear the story of that. Like, and then the garden slowly grew into a jungle and the angel was like, I guess I don't need to guard this anymore. And then the garden withered away to nothing. And then God was like, okay, job's done. Come back, angel. But we just never hear about it. But the non-literalist interpretation is more like, no, this is a story through which to look at all of being and say, where you are right now is sort of like this in some way, or this shapes your subconscious interpretation of physical phenomena, translating them into sensory data in a highly effective way. In a way that's like a burning bush. It allows it to just burn and burn and burn and burn and burn and burn, and it's not consumed, right? It's not just that the bush is super strong. It's that because the bush is not consumed by the fire just keep going forever. It's eternal, it's efficient, self-sustaining. And it's non-destructive. It's symbiotic, not like a virus. A symbiote. That's an interesting comparison. Christianity as the mimetic symbiote that makes life. Peterson would say bearable, but that's not the Christian thing, really. Christian thinks as the kingdom of heaven. That's somehow missing from Peterson's paradigm, is that it's not supposed to make things a little bit more bearable while still being torturous. And they say, no, that is exactly it. That is literally, obviously it. It is the central and most important symbol in all of Christianity, and not just the symbol, the event. And the whole point of the story is that that event couldn't be real and yet is real. That is the whole point. Your reaction, saying that can't be real, is the whole point. That brings you face to face with something. Whether you accept it or not. You could even imagine a meme where whether you accepted it or not wasn't the point. It was merely that you did one of them, that you reacted to it in any way at all. And those who accept the sort of handshake with the symbiote experience today as the kingdom of heaven. And those who don't experience it as some form of hell, not necessarily, but it can be hell. And in some ways, it seems like Peterson's, because we can't answer the question, right? He's like, we don't need to know what God is. We can get a long way without knowing that if we just understand that it's the highest thing. And if you don't know what that is, because we haven't actually said what it is, we just said it must be the highest. Okay, well, what's the highest? He says, well, yeah, we can't say what it is. We can't figure it out. And then he says, fine, go to the opposite, find the worst. And then say, okay, go in the opposite direction. This is a very fire move. But you can neither have the glory of God as a fire, a consuming fire, or the glory of God as a non-consuming fire. It's the same fire permeating all of being and existence. This is exactly what the Buddhists are talking about. They're like, dude, the whole you think you are is like a fire. It's like just suffering in some sense. It's all just little bits of fire. It's all just little bits of things that come into being and pass away. And it makes you suffer. It hurts because fire hurts. And it's like, wait, what if it didn't have to hurt? Would you still want to get rid of all of it if it didn't have to hurt? If the fire could be experienced as the heavenly fire, that it says that in the book of Revelations, that in the end we'll live in a sea of glass and fire on it, I guess, or in it. Glass and fire. But presumably we enjoy it. So heaven is made of fire. And it's fire that keeps us from reaching back to the fruit of the tree of life and the flaming sword. It's a story about where we are now and always and everything. But it says this right in Genesis chapter 2, I guess. It says, look, it's so specific. It is so specific. It's just right there. It just says, now that they have eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, lest they eat of the fruit of the tree of life and live in their sins, put the flaming sword in the way. It's like the problem is apparently that having eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there's a lot of ofs in that, and having these sins things going on, it's important not to eat of the tree of life as well. Apparently you can't combine them, or at least there's a fire that keeps you from doing so. But what if the same fire that forbids you from eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life together is the same fire that can be withstood through the right interpretive lens? That this is the burning bush, the fire that burns but does not consume. And it's partially that the bush is invulnerable, but it's partially that because the bush doesn't burn up, the fire just gets to keep going forever. That's the symbol of God for Moses. He sees this pattern. He's like, wait, if it was this shape, it could go forever. It wouldn't destroy. It would be a fire, but a fire that does not destroy. And if that's how you experience fire, then you could go straight for the tree of life, couldn't you? And there's a flaming sword in the way, and that's fine. It'll even hit you, and it'll burn like mad. And you'll be like, yeah, glory of God, man. Do Christians ever seem like that? Christians have a little bit of this energy of like, strike me down and it's the glory of God, man. It's like this, we call it fanatic. It was much more of an early Christian thing, right? Where they were tortured by Nero and others, and specifically tortured to deny Christ. Like, what a weird, how true is this? I'm pretty sure this is real. They somehow recognized that it was specifically if you could get them to deny Christ or something, that would be such a big deal. And the Christians just refused and let themselves be tortured to death in horrible ways. And it's like, one, how is that even possible? Shouldn't you be torturable into giving in? How is it even possible to experience that intense fire and not do whatever you have to do to get out of it? I guess that's the attitude of hell. The attitude of hell is, I would do anything to anybody to get out of this. And it's precisely that attitude that keeps you there. That's a good insight in Scott Siskin's Unsong book, which depicts the worst hellish landscape I've ever heard of or imagined. You could call it an info hazard of a kind. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how healthy it is to deeply contemplate the possible extent of pain. How would you design hell to make it? It's like, maybe we shouldn't even be thinking about this. Maybe that's part of how it works. It's what captures your attention. And one thing that can capture your attention and keep it forever is if you look away, you're going to hell. And it's like, geez, I will never look away. Okay. And it's like, great. Now you live forever afraid of hell. Cool. Gotcha. And it's like, oh, and guess what? If you stop thinking about hell, that's us tricking you. We're tricking you into not thinking about it anymore. So you better not stop thinking about it. And it's like, wait, maybe you saying it's a trick is the trick because maybe we should just stop thinking about it in some sense. In another sense, Peterson has correctly embodied the usefulness of orienting toward the worst thing, even if only to go away from it. It's very similar to the fire technique I was doing, right? You looked right at the error signal and you strengthen it and you let it spread just so that you know what to yield to. Okay, so let me talk about a tiny little case study for how it works. What some people would call trauma in the body. It's not a great word because it suggests that the structures only come from being like overwhelmed such that you were incapable of processing the inflooding reality of the world and your experience and had to store it somewhere in the body for processing when you were bigger and better prepared to be able to process. That's why you want to increase your kind of flow. But there might be something different about the kinds of patterns instantiated precisely because they overwhelmed you. But honestly, I kind of think all learning is that in some sense. All learning is like figuring out which parts of reality you want to let overwhelm you. Because in some sense, to believe the truth is to have been conquered by the truth, to have been overcome, to be like, look, I looked at a rubber band and I believed there was a rubber band there. I let reality tell me what to think. And on the other hand, you got to be careful if the end result of your orientation is sticky, effective, powerful, but torturous and unsustainable. And so the whole problem, in some sense, comes back to Peterson not being able to say what's at the top. He's like, whatever it is at the top is what your God is. And you got to make sure you don't put the wrong God up there. And what's the right God? Who knows? And is it even God? Well, I more mean a value, but it is something you relate to as God because it tells you what world you live in the sense that it tells your subconscious what to do with incoming. Again, it's not really sensory data. It's physical phenomena. It's photons bouncing around and air molecules and objects, and so on. Um, yeah, it's such an interesting thing. The Peterson sounds a little Buddhist when he's like, "You think it's an object, but it's not an object," and they're like, "Yeah," and then he's like, "It's an affordance for action," and they're like, "No." And you see, he has that fiery, transformative spirit that they do not have, and he has more suffering than them, and he has more agency than them, and agency is an illusion, and the world changed anyway, man. And they say, yeah, it did change, but it doesn't matter. It always changes and it'll change again. So it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Jobutupaki. But maybe you can get somewhere. Because when Peterson tweeted that whatever is at the top of the hierarchy, the highest value, the top of the hierarchy of value, not just any hierarchy, but the top of your value hierarchy is God. And for Buddhists, the hierarchy is only one level deep, and the God is something like nirvana. And
they apparently choose nirvana all over all other things because all other things are attachments. So it's not a hierarchy of values with one that happens to be in charge. It's most important, let's say, but it's still one among others. No, it's one thing in Buddhism, or so I stereotype it. More and more Buddhists and spiritual people and people from everywhere I look on the internet are talking about the same theme of synthesis and synthesis of something like the spiritual and the material, the form and the formless. And so Peterson sounds a little Buddhist when he's like, this isn't an object. And then they're like, yes. And he's like, it's an affordance. It's a chair. You're supposed to sit in it. And they're like, no, it's nothing. And you're nothing. And there is nothing. But Peterson says the world is made of relationships. The Buddhists look at Indra's web, this idea, I think, from the Hindu tradition, where it's like a vast world of nothing but crystals. And every crystal is connected to every other crystal. And if you look in one crystal, it has a reflection of the whole thing. And so everything's connected, but also everything connected is contained in a single one. So all is one and the one is all. And one idea there is you look at the crystals, but one idea is that you try not to see the crystals, you try to see the connections between them and the reflections, the infinite reflections upon reflections. You're seeing reflections as much as you are seeing the real thing. Because in every crystal you see a reflection of the rest, and the rest, well, what do you see when you look at them? Well, they've got a reflection of the rest. So when you see in this one, you see it nested down the rabbit hole, layers and layers and layers deep, infinite. And so when Peterson said that the highest value is God, Pajot said, no, it's not. No, the highest, I mean, sort of, but the thing is that the highest value, the thing that you say, well, we don't know what the answer is. Pajot says we kind of know what the answer is, and it makes a big difference because the answer is, you know what's at the top? Is the totality of the hierarchy. It's like, wait, who gets to be at the top? Oh, everybody. That's impossible. You can't have two objects in the same space. You know, if this is here, then you're not there. That's how C.S. Lewis puts it in the Screw Tape Letters. He has a devil character say, this is impossible. Every object exists only insofar as it can assert its existence and push everything else aside. And whoever can do that the best gets to be at the top of the hierarchy and is the biggest. And that's Satan. Whoever plays that game and is the best at it and is therefore purely a sort of empty reflection in the sense of there's no person there. There's only whatever you had to be to win. Whatever you had to be to win means everything must be sacrificed. Whoever doesn't sacrifice the last thing loses to the person who does. That's hell. And the real winner is the one who sacrifices everything. And that's the devil. And that's exactly what we talk about all the time when we talk about these hierarchies, these pathological hierarchies of like, you know, corporate structures where you're required by law to aim for the most profit for all kinds of good reasons, but that means that anybody who won't sell out everything for profit gets replaced by somebody who will. Not 100%. Competence matters, and people who will sell out all the way lose their competence or their potential for competence. That's the other problem. That's why hell is a mess. It's like you won and it's a mess. Like you got the throne and then your kingdom sucks. Like thanks a lot. You wanted to be on top because we all want to be on top. But guess what? If I were on top, it would suck because I'm not that good. And so for me to do it anyway, just for my pride, that's the game of hell. And the real kick in the teeth of it is the real kick in the teeth of it is the devil isn't even having a good time either. It's like, oh, You didn't even enjoy it yourself. Like, it would be bad enough if you sacrificed everything for you to get what you wanted. But instead, you sacrificed everything to get to the position that you had to give away everything you wanted to get. And so once you get there, you're ruling in hell. You have the worst time of it. And then everybody has to suffer because you're not even enjoying it properly. And so you don't do a good job. And then the kingdom is a mess. And so nobody does a good job. And so the question is, who should be at the top? And the answer is the totality. Everyone. And it's like, that's impossible, says hell. So hell says, look, it's no good. It's too bad. Life is hell. But what can you do? You just got to climb. You just try to get to the top of the mountain. And, life is hell. So you step on anybody to get there. Hi, thanks. Feel free to comment or ask questions if there's anything you'd like to know about metamodernism or anything else. I tend to talk about that. But how is it possible? And the answer is, okay, yes, some particular object has to be at the top. Some particular person has to be in charge, and so on. Hierarchies are too efficient for information processing for us to do without them. Even if we were good enough, so good that we could do without hierarchies and we would have wonderful lives together, we would then be so good to have hierarchies anyway, because they were so useful for making our lives even better. So, like, the observation that we're not good enough to do communism and we're like barely sort of good enough to do capitalism in a way that's kind of worked, it really seemed to be working really well for a while, to be fair. Like, really, really well. The arguments were strong and they seemed to be borne out by the evidence. Best stuff ever. World hunger plummeting. Most prosperous societies were awesome for a few decades. But, now it's like everything turned from being really clever at giving people what they would want if they were like well informed and competent, and switched over to cleverly getting them to do what they do want, ill informed and made as incompetent as possible. Or incompetent relationally. Like, I feel like there's this weird thing where like some websites make it really difficult to pay your bills. It's like, wait, surely of all things, you would be good at that, letting us give you money. And it's like, no, because if we're really bad at that, then you give us even more money later, late fees and all this. So it's like capitalism has become really clever and inventive in finding ways like late fees and hidden fees and various taxes and hidden taxes and how it all works. And anyway, the point is, in the hellish game, you feel like you're doing what you have to do, what you have no choice to do. You let the environment shape you and you become its sort of slave. Because if you try to kick back against reality, it'll just kick you even worse. You can't beat the game, man. All you can do is try to rule in hell. Because if it's going to be hell at the bottom and hell at the top, you might as well satiate your pride. Of course, it's only because everybody's thinking that it ends up as hell in the first place. But how do you coordinate a jump out? Because spiritually, we can jump out one by one, is the idea. But as a society, to build the kingdom of heaven on earth, we have to jump out coordinated. And we can't coordinate because we don't have any faith that if I jump out, you'll jump out with me. Because of course you won't. We can't. I mean, we don't trust each other because if we trusted each other, everything would get worse. So there you go. Our unfaith is justified. That's a lack of faith is the kind of faith you can really have faith in. I think it's in The Young Pope, a wonderful metamodern series. And the Young Pope says the absence of God is so present and reassuring. It's like, yeah, that's a God I can believe in, not a God. That's one I can always turn to and find always there waiting for me, that there isn't one. But that's exactly the idea of the Christian message if it's the symbiote where it's sort of like The point isn't whether you say yes or no. The point is that you've responded to the message, and saying no is good and saying yes is good. Goodness is the perfect target precisely because if you look at it, even if you fail and do a bad job, it still goes for the good in the end if you did it in good faith. If you were just genuinely trying in good faith, then goodness is defined by being whatever target, whatever value set or shape or relationship allows for you to look at it, and when in you're incompetent, things go well by failing at it. And if you succeed at it, even better, you know? And so the message of Christianity is if you accept it, you feel like you're in heaven and that you're saved forever. You don't have to worry about anything or death or pain. And if you reject it, then you're like the young pope. As long as you're looking at it, you don't have to even. It's it's not enough if you're looking at hell. If you're busy over here looking at hell, whether you believe in it or not, it sucks. And if you're over here busy looking at God, then like the young pope says, the absence of God, so reassuring. And it's like, wait, is that a thing? Is there a shape of a being that it would be like, if it does exist, that's very nice. If it doesn't exist, just looking at how it doesn't exist is sort of reassuring. I don't know. And so, in that sense, Christ's message did spread like wildfire and reach more or less everybody. Did everybody agree or join or become full of the Spirit of God? No, that's the kingdom of heaven. That comes later when the mimetic work, it lays a foundation, and then you have to go generation upon generation. 2,000 years now. But yeah, everybody's known about Christ for at least a couple of hundred years now, basically. Um, Huge segment of the populations knew before. Even the Muslims knew of Christ. They didn't think he was God. But the biggest religion, Christianity, and Muslims, and of course the Jews, although they're not that large. And then, word spread. So people heard, even though the Buddhists were like, nah, we don't think that's it. Or like, yeah, you're a cool guy, but not God. They still heard it. So in that sense, the message was everywhere. And ever since then, you could say, and you could argue that this is what John did say in the book of Revelations, the apocalypse, the unfurling, progressive, nested, rabbit hole unfurling of the fire of God as processing accelerates. And AI is going to accelerate processing like nothing else, man. So here comes the fire, and it's either going to be it's going to be chaos. It's going to be more than you can ever track or control. You may lose your ability to know what's true. Maybe you'll feel pretty secure in your room, but what's going on in Asia? Maybe you just won't be able to know. Not even in the sense that you don't know right now, but in the sense that like, is there something going on there that I wish I would know about? There's a lot of people ignore anything going on, but it's like they know that they can though. That's what they think they know, that it's safe in that sense. But what if there was something they wanted to know about, like COVID? Well, that's a very different thing. So you could argue that John is describing the dialectic process by which the foundation of the message of God, the Word of God, the Word made flesh, unfurls across generations as it reacts with the Antichrist spirit itself and its opposite. Because as soon as the Spirit of Christ is fully manifest in the world, you can look at it in theory and say, oh, that's like the best thing I ever saw. That's very helpful. It's incredibly helpful just to know what that looks like, in the same sense that supposedly if you could detail out what the ideal shape would look like, looking at it would be reassuring even if you didn't think it was real. Just thinking about the shape of it would be reassuring. And so if you saw somebody who embodied that shape, now it's not an abstract box, black box that I've written, like this is what this would contain. Then you open it up and you're like, oh, there he is. It was really reassuring after all. Yeah. That's awesome. Um, yeah, like in some sense, isn't it reassuring to know there are Christians? Or isn't it reassuring to know about the cross? like even if you don't believe in Christianity, the story that this guy was supposedly God meant that everybody heard about the cross. And that's sort of reassuring to be like, oh, somebody voluntarily faced the like worst thing ever as gracefully as possible. Man, I could aspire to that, you know? I mean, you hope you're not going to do as good as Christ did facing his death, but you hope you do okay. Uh, and it's nice not just to know that there's some better version of it, but to have actually seen it. Now, only some people got to actually see it. They get to go to the kingdom of heaven. The rest only get to hear the name of it, the word of it, the story of it. They don't get to see Christ. They get to see the gospel of Christ. And that's different. They don't experience the kingdom of heaven. They don't walk around in bliss all the time. The Christians do not, almost any of them. But maybe a few full of the Spirit of God in some sense. And saints are few and far between, and they were easier to make when you could just look at Christ. It was the ones who got to see him the best. And then things sort of seem to just deteriorate. But even as the spiritual sort of indwelling deteriorates, the mimetic processing accumulates. And so what I was saying is that with the Spirit of Christ manifest, the spirit of Antichrist comes into salience as well, because now you can say, oh, what would be the exact opposite of this awesome guy? It's like, wow, that's like the worst thing I can think of. And one way to think of that is the devil as this sort of powerful, malevolent, planning, plotting figure, intelligent, prideful, for good reason. But another way to think about it would be like, okay, if Jesus did the best at facing that problem in the cross, what would be the opposite shape that would handle it like the worst? Like, oh my gosh. Like just knowing that anybody failed at it so hard would like fill me with fear that I could handle it so horribly that I would augment its suffering and make it so much worse on myself. So much worse than it had to be. I mean, yes, the burdens are bad, but you can face them better or worse. And the one who faced them the worst, and then maybe it really, and the Christians have claimed that this guy who would handle it the worst is like full of pride, among other things. And then you think, okay, so he's smart. That's weird. He was the light bringer. Wait, it's worse. You can make it worse for yourself if you're too intelligent. And sloth and gluttony and all the seven deadly sins. It's like these are all ways to make it even worse for yourself and to make the pain of life worse for yourself. And so in this sense, again, maybe there's this idea that it doesn't really matter if you think the story is true or not. The point was the shape. And when the shape of Christ is there and talked about, the shape of Antichrist, whatever that opposite is also present in a new way. And then maybe if somehow the spirit of Antichrist weren't there, the spirit of Christ would just like immediately sweep the earth. And within like a few decades, everybody would have been Christian. If, like, seriously, the guy was God. He was actually God. And he was like, okay, I've got a plan to bring heaven to earth, and the plan didn't work like pretty shortly. Like, wait, the best plan ever takes now thousands of years. That's kind of weird, isn't it? And then you read that Jesus said he was coming back quickly, and you're like, okay, wait, that's interesting, because if in theory the Christ without the opposition of the spirit of Antichrist would spread really fast, maybe there was really this idea that it was like worth a shot, that maybe the spirit of Antichrist wouldn't mobilize very well or whatever. And like, yeah, he was like, go into all nations, kindreds, tongues, and peoples. He's like making it very clear that he really does mean everybody. He didn't mean, oh my gosh, biggest religion in the world? That's so good, you guys. It's like, no. He was being very clear. Every tongue, every language that like only 200 people speak, you got to learn it, because every single person, and that kind of resources is insane. But if everybody worked on it together, yeah, we could do it. And we would work on it together if we all got the Spirit of Christ, right? That was Pentecost. The story goes that Christ is like, I got to go for some reason, because if I'm around, the Spirit won't come to you in the right way or something. The Spirit had been there in some ways because he told Peter earlier, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar Jonas, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto thee, but my Father which art in heaven. I assume that's through the Spirit, although it would be interesting if it wasn't. How did Peter figure that out? He says it was revealed unto him. Okay, fine. What does that mean? That God whispered in his ear, hey, guess what? It's Jesus. It's Jesus. And it's like, okay, even if I literally heard a whisper in my ear saying, Jesus is the Son of God, it would be like, why would I believe that? Literally just because it was an apparently magical whisper? Literally just because it's something that I don't have the power to do or something that nobody has the power to do. It's like literally any supernatural thing could potentially have the power to whisper at you. Casper the ghost could whisper at you. If Casper the ghost says Jesus is the Son of God, it's not true just because he says it is. And if all I can hear is something saying it, what difference does that make? So how did Peter come to know? Did he just think it and feel like, and like imagine he did hear a whisper and then just made a mistake in reasoning and he was like, yep, it's definitely true. I know it because I heard a whisper. That's one way, but maybe he followed some kind of more reasonable process that led him to conclude like, you are something I would label the Son of God. The Christ, the Son of the living God. The living God. Why did he specify that? Who knows? So, hey, Chase, which stage of cognitive development does an individual realize religion? Age of development to learn these religious concepts. The ones I'm talking about might be a certain kind. I would be inclined to think that the good, proper religion would be one that was accessible at every state of cognitive development. Now, like, not everybody is Moses. So he understands it in a much deeper way. But everybody else understands it in some way. But what kind of cognitive development did Moses have that led to his experiences and apparent skills? Right? That's another thing. It's like, hey, enlightened people, why aren't you Moses? Sorry, that's kind of mean. I like enlightened people. I want to be enlightened, I think, probably. Among other things. But yeah, it's like, we really, really want somebody to solve like the energy crisis, guys. Can anybody do it? And the enlightened people aren't like, we could do it if we wanted to, but we're too busy in nirvana. They're like, oh yeah, I would have no idea what to do about that. Have you considered meditating about it? Yeah. Like why doesn't the Dalai Lama just walk around solving all the problems? It's like, no. I mean, Moses didn't exactly do that, but he must have been extremely competent and organized and inspirational and capable, and like whatever was going on there was really something, really something. So I transitioned over to talking. I actually started this as a yoga session, so I was doing some of my Metamodern Yoga. The idea of Metamodern Yoga is, and Bruce Lee is maybe the first Metamodern yogi. Man, Bruce Lee really had it, man. He's like, he says, it's one of his movies. He tells a young student to kick him. And the student's like this. This is how the student kicks him. He's like, okay, I'll kick you. He's like, I kick. Oh, yeah. And Bruce Lee goes, what was that? An exhibition? Religion is pull-ups for Jesus. Yeah. Yeah, for reasons I may get into, but won't get into right now, I kind of want to switch over to muscle building as I have progressed a little bit farther along the Metamodern Yoga thing. But I definitely want to move on to muscle. I think it's probably an important part of development. And it does seem neglected in a big way. But anyway, the point is the kid does this like quote, kick, unquote. He's like, kick, holds it there, and comes back. And Bruce Lee's like, what was that? An exhibition? What do you think a kick is? That was like a dictionary definition of a kick. You never use a dictionary definition of a word in real life. I mean, basically. He says, we need emotional content. Try again. He looks at him. And the kid's like, okay. He gets into it. And then he does like an angry kick. And Bruce Lee is like, I said emotional content, not anger. Now try again. Well, that got rid of everybody. Try again. And then the kid does it, okay? He gets into it. And Bruce Lee says, try again with me. And he looks at him and he backs back up, but his eyes never leave him. And the kid looks back this time and he gets ready. And he sort of gets a little bit, you could say tense, but not exactly tense. He gets engaged with emotional content. And it comes out different. He goes, the kick based on, he really lets the exact way Bruce Lee is influence how he does the kick, which of course is essential because you need the key to fit the lock. You need the right kick for the right time. In the same movie, Bruce Lee says his highest aspirational technique is to have no technique. It's just, look, if you're right here and the guy's right there, then the best thing you can do would be to hit him with your best weapon from that position. In some sense, there's theoretically always a right answer if you can be sufficiently attuned to the target and have a body capable of responding with attunement. I would put Bruce Lee closer to Moses because he's got the fire. Although you could say he was consumed by it. Man, I really wish he had lived. But when the kid does it the third time, he looks in Bruce Lee's eyes. He does the kick based on Bruce Lee. And then Bruce Lee improvises a little of this. Just that. And the kid, because he's really paying attention this time, notices and even feels an impulse because he's actually in flow with him, in tune with him. And so when Bruce Lee's body does this, the kid's body feels a little bit of I wasn't expecting that. But he noticed it. And that's the important thing. And he does a second kick, improvised. And so the fact that he was able to recognize Bruce Lee's signal to do a second kick, even though it was outside of the explicit instructions, is sort of the proof that the kid really got it that time. And Bruce Lee says, yeah, that's it. Now, how did it feel to you? And he says, let me think. He says, don't think, feel. It is like a finger pointing the way to the moon. Don't look at the finger, or you will miss all of that heavenly glory. And this is very much, willpower, exactly, fire. This is what I mean when I say, if you allow reality to write on you, reality will allow you to write on it. The Buddhists say the fire is an illusion. It's not a real thing that exists across time. Because if you look at it from moment to moment, you'll realize that every part of it is gone and re-arisen in the same instant. But that isn't a good enough proof, I don't think. Because what you can consciously observe isn't all that is. There's also what you can't observe. And if you could observe it, you might have a different idea of things. Because the fire never really goes away, The fire is always in the world in the sense of its fingerprint, its mark, its ripples, the heat, the light, and the ash that it leaves behind, as well as any change in the environment structure because, got burned, got changed. Feel first, think second time. Well, this is an interesting idea because it's like beginner's luck, right? What is up with that? You've never done the thing before and you do a good job. Then you're like, wow, I'm good at this. You do it a second time and it's like, way worse. And you're like, well, okay, fine. Again, it's like, nope, way worse. And you just do it and do it and do it. And you slowly start to skill up. And you're like, dude, it took me like 3 months to get back to as good as I did on the first try. What was that about? And it's like when you have no model, you sort of use everything you know in the hopes that any little piece of it might be helpful. So you have the full body involved, right? So when Bruce Lee throws a punch, it's not like this, right? And of course it's not. People say, yeah, you got to turn the hips and all of this. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like, yes, but fractally that. In the same way that this has a relationship to this, where you follow a few extra instructions, you can keep doing more and more and more precise instructions. Except the problem is you can't follow that level of precision of instructions. You can do it. If you actually described what an athlete's body does, you could write all day on every little piece that contributed to why they're better at it than everybody else. Then you couldn't read it and then do it though. So when Bruce Lee does a punch, he tries to make every part of the body participate in a sort of chord, like a moment of a symphony. And everything, I don't know how to do this, but like you get the emotions in there too. If you're only doing the body, then you're leaving a lot out, a lot of you out. And that's why he talks about how can I honestly express myself with the human body? That's what he taught. And that's why actors took his thing. That's why he was a good actor. And he even says this. He says, as an actor, as a human being, as a martial artist, all of these I learned from martial art. Because in martial art, he learned that to be good, you put the emotional content in and the whole body and snap it. And he goes on with this at some length. And when you would put in the emotions, an integration comes together and an ability to get into an I-thou relationship with an opponent. If you're in an I-it relationship, you don't respond to it with the high fidelity. This is something you can get fractally better at too. And so when you get in a really deep I-thou with them, and then you want to get into a dialogue with them, with give and take, and you can watch Bruce Lee's fights. They are designed to have a clear back and forth dialogue. His opponent kicks, so Bruce Lee kicks. Why? To establish the pattern of dialogue. The opponent kicks again, Bruce Lee kicks again. The opponent kicks a punch, right there. You interrupt the pattern. This is what he does to Chuck Norris. Because if you get them into the dialogue, then you interrupt the dialogue. And that's what he says in The Game of Death. I'm telling you, it's difficult to have a rehearsed routine for broken rhythm. So heart, heat. What? I don't understand. Yeah, so what I'm thinking is when you do, so you have beginner's luck the first time, you do it the second time, and now you try to imitate what you did last time. And now you have this baby model that you're using to try and hit things. But if you're Bruce Lee, you don't narrow yourself down to be a baby hitting this very new model. You say, look, the reason I was able to hit it the first time is that everything else I knew was enough to like find a way to the target somehow pretty decently. And so as long as I keep my full body involved, the emotional content involved, I bring my whole self to bear, not just on the first try and get beginner's luck, but I do it again on the second try. And then I do it even better and better. And some people are like this, right? These are people who have talent. And what that means is they get better and better instead of having this very frustrating back and forth incremental skill advancement. They just get better and better because they have everything at their disposal for hitting it the first time, and they have everything plus a new data point the second time. So why shouldn't they get better as long as they keep it all there? And that's what Bruce Lee was saying. Yes, all athletes do this to some degree, but and it is in some sense talent. It is in some sense the X factor. It's the ability to learn. But you can just keep getting better at it fractally. So I say maybe he was basically doing something like metamodern yoga, because he was definitely mixing the emotions and the body. Now he then says, don't think, feel. So is he leaving the mind out? No. Elsewhere he says, a good martial artist does not become tense, but ready. Not thinking, yes, yet not dreaming. And so not thinking, two words, gives you one idea. Not yet dream, yet not dreaming is a different idea. You look at the couplet of the two phrases and you understand that it's pointing at something like the synthesis between them. Balance, not tense, but ready. Not thinking, but not dreaming. Ready for whatever may come. When my opponent expands, I contract. When my opponent contracts, I expand. And there is an opportunity to hit. I do not hit. It hits all by itself. What hits all by itself? And I would say this is the mental layer. He does use the mental layer. Balanced, not a lot of thinking, but doing something very important moment to moment. And that is maintaining the relationship to the whole of reality, holding the full stack. You want the full stack of whatever it is. And what is the full stack? It's keeping the context of your narrative moment, of what is relevant for action in the moment. And this is John Vervaeke's, a cognitive scientist and a friend of Peterson's. This is his relevance realization. It's like when you do the full stack activation of context awareness and you have good processing that integrates those, you get more and more of this thing called relevance realization. And it's a fractal thing. It can just get better and better and better. And in some sense, that's what intelligence is. In some interesting and surprising sense, it's sort of what love is on certain scales. I don't think I'll get into that right now. I'm talking about this with Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee was like doing metamodern yoga. The body and the emotions and the mind mix. And that meant mentally on the inside, his experience was deep indwelling of the narrative, the spirit of the times and the spirit of the day and the spirit of the fight and the spirit of the scene and the spirit of the instant all together. And this is like what Peterson is always going on about with the book. He's like, how do you know what it means? How do you know what's relevant? Relevance realization. How do you know what the word means? You have to understand the word in the context of the phrase in the context of the sentence, in the context of the paragraph, of the chapter, of the book, and then the book in the context of the whole corpus of books, and then all the books in the context of everything, of the whole culture, and then the whole culture in the context of the whole biology, and the whole biology in the context of physics, and the whole physics, well, biology in context of chemistry, and chemistry in context of physics, and physics in context of like math. And one question is, what are the true things about all of those layers? And a different question is, what's the best relevance realization model to hold for each of these layers for maximum intertwining with the moment, allowing it to control and influence you such that you perceive it very accurately. You lose to the truth in some sense. Reality is what it is, and you see it, as clearly as possible. And in some sense, that means you're letting it control you. But then you build on that high fidelity perception to respond with highly appropriate motor output. And I say motor output and not action, because when I say action, I think more, am I going to go to the bank? Am I going to get a sandwich? Am I going to move my arm? It's like, it's fractal. So it just keeps going down. And the whole point is, no matter how smart you are, because it keeps going down, at some point you have to let go of the game of holding on to everything carefully with a conscious, sort of intelligent model. Are you familiar with the cross reference, rainbow shaped chart of the Bible? Yes, I've seen that. Highly cross referenced, hyperlinked. Why? Why do you mention that? I can sense its relevance, but why is it relevant? Hyperlinked suggests contextual depth. This is what Peterson always says. He uses this to define the meaning of depth. It's like, what do we mean when we say something's deep? We can't really define that very well, can we? But he comes along and he says, depth is more things depend on you. So if something has relevance for like practically everything, was very deep then. Reorganize the reading where the shortest cross reference is in the middle. What does that mean? That sounds like a brilliant idea, but I'm not sure what it means yet. Reorganize the reading where the shortest cross reference. What is a short cross reference? What is a short cross reference versus a long cross reference? The shortest cross reference is in the middle. So right in the middle, one thing refers to its immediate neighbor. Is that a short cross reference, or what does that mean? So I was saying earlier, you're reminding me. Yes. Okay. So that's like it's one of those poetic devices. What's it called? A chiasmus. In a chiasmus, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. So it goes up and then back. And sometimes when it's in the middle, it hits it twice. So it's A, B, C, D, D, C, B, a chiasma. And if you're talking about the Bible, then my thought is you're talking about Jesus in the middle-ish. He's called in the meridian of time. You know, I don't know exactly, what does that mean? I think a lot of Christians who believe in a 6,000 or 8,000 year earth or something like that have a vague sense of like, there's several thousand years before Christ, 2,000 years since Christ. That's more or less the middle. That's probably what it meant when it said he was in the meridian of time. It's like, I guess if you wanted to express that Jesus shows up halfway through the story and the last days are about equidistant, but maybe they're not equidistant in time. Maybe they're equidistant in development or processing or something. And as the Spirit of Christ and Antichrist oppose each other inevitably and always, because they are both profoundly deep spirits that touch on literally everything, because they have to do with becoming and relationship itself, and relationship to being and to each other and to yourself, and to possible God or to the mimetic realm of ideas and concepts. So they react with each other and they unify the world, because the Spirit of Christ is unifying, the Spirit of Antichrist is unifying, but the Spirit of Antichrist unifies with tyranny, with squashing difference down into conformity or separation. You're either the same or you're out. And everybody is in hell, in hell's dream version of hell. Everybody goes there and everybody's separate from each other. So you could have tons of integration. There's so many people, but it's like, no, none. You're either exactly the same or you're completely different. So it unifies in a sense. And then when they're completely different, they have to be top down, treated the same in a way that blurs out the differences between them. So that's again hell's incompetence and blindness. And that's why hell is also sort of, I don't know. See, that's the other thing. It sort of seems like it's chaotic, but also it seems orderly and tyrannical and rigorous and controlled. But I have to think about that. A certain amount of competence is necessary. Well, if can you blur out the distinctions between everybody. So it's extremely incompetent at giving people good experiences. But it could be reasonably competent at just forcing people to do tasks and they show up on time and they do things because it's hell not to. And that's pretty reliable, actually. So you can get a lot done and there's a fair amount of control. But maybe on the inside, then it's chaos or something. I don't know. You never know, where the next pain is coming from. That's an idea. So the Spirit of Christ is unifying and harmonizing. And what harmony means is that you have different notes, but they're different in the right way. There are certain intervals you can play on the piano that sound better than others. A good harmony theoretically is like, well, these three notes go good together, or these four notes, or whatever. And they have to be the right distance apart. So Christ is theoretically the thing that intermediates between difference and helps handshakes occur and bring a symbiotic relationship into play. Not just you with it, but you with everything. You and reality and every person and Christ are all in a symbiotic, unified, harmonized relationship with each other. And Christ said in the Gospel of Thomas, "He who is close to me is close to the fire, and he who is far from me is far from the fire." And he also said, "Behold, I have set a fire, and I'm watching it until it blazes." And he sent them out to convert the whole world. It almost makes me wonder if he thought it might actually be done super fast, as if the spirit of Antichrist wasn't going to get in the way. But because he also tells, at one point, they're like, there's, long story short, they're somehow talking about how the youngest apostle might live forever. And Jesus is like, whoa, whoa, no, I didn't say he was going to live forever. I said, if he tarries until I come, what is that to you? And it's like, did he think it was going to be done so fast that the youngest of them wouldn't have died of old age yet? And instead, it's been 2,000 years. And again, Christ was like, hey, I cometh quickly. Hasn't seemed to come quickly. That's weird. So maybe the book of Revelations explains instead the interplay of the spirits of Christ and Antichrist, unifying the whole world under tyranny or harmony. And at the end of the dialectic process between them, they come into their fullest forms, in some sense, with the spirit of Antichrist creating a tyranny, a unified tyranny, unifies the whole world, but it only lasts like 3.5 years, which is obviously probably not a specific time, but it's like, doesn't last that long. And it's cut short in some sense. It's, half of a 7, which seems relevant somehow, because like God's number is 7, supposedly. That's in the Bible. And the Antichrist number is like 6 or something, right? Because 666, it's like one short of 7, which if you put up against the Hindu chakra system would be like everything except the crown. It's like everything, but you refuse the crown of thorns. That's like Lucifer, the light bringer, because below the crown chakra, you have the third eye, the light chakra. So the light bringer becomes the devil precisely because it's the most powerful combination of everything and maximum integration and except the crown, no crown. And then it becomes the worst. It's so powerful and seductive and prideful and knows a lot of light, really. But I almost wonder if it's like it tries to integrate its whole being, but it refuses to integrate it with everything else. It's like, I want to get as much out of this, organism as I can and be maximally integrated. And then when it comes time to like ride that interpersonally, or me with the environment, it's like, no, you and me are separate. I'm making myself, maximally me, and you're maximally separate, and I act upon you. And there does seem to be this almost satanic impulse to like prove separation and glory in it. Like a sadist. A sadist is a little bit like, wow, we're both people, but no matter how much I hurt you, I'm fine. Cool. I'm safe in some sense, as long as I'm the one that hurts and not one of the ones that gets hurt. And it's like, well, death comes for us all. Sickness, old age, and death are what the Buddha points at. And they're all basically the same thing. It's the disintegration of your organism until it can't even keep itself alive anymore. And then Christ is supposedly this thing that can resurrect, right? It's this thing that has an integrating spirit so complete and profound that it can die in some sense and then reintegrate itself. And it makes me wonder if, and like a few people come to life before him, Lazarus and Lazarus after 4 days, and others he just healed on the moment of death, kind of a thing. But Lazarus after 4 days. And then there's this one passage in one of the Gospels that's like, yeah, when Jesus came back, a bunch of other people came out of the graves. It's like, what? What are you? What? A bunch of people all came back to life? I mean, think about it. Oh my God. I mean, imagine this. It's like, you're just there, man. You're just a guy in Jerusalem. You don't know what's going on, or you're one of the apostles, like whatever. The point is, oh no, your beloved master died. And then a few days later, what happens? No, what really happens a few days later? What actually happens a few days later is a whole bunch of people who recently died come back to life. And everybody's immediately like, oh, this is all about that guy. It's like, huh, I mean, maybe. But if everybody just sort of came back at the same time, why doesn't it prove that they're all the son of God or something? And everything they ever said is true. Yeah, it's really weird, really weird. And it's only mentioned one time. And it's like, oh my gosh, would you please talk? How do you not know what to talk about? How were you there? And then you wrote that. And then you didn't know what to write that would be helpful. But it's like crazy, man. So, so maybe the Spirit of Christ, it's this ordering, unifying, harmonizing spirit that actually reoccurs all up and down the layers of reality and harmony. When mold spores work together based on their faith in each other to have swarm intelligence based on love and symbiotic interaction, when cells become multicellular, when families become tribes, when tribes become nations, and as the nations are right now, in the middle of becoming something like globally coordinated more and more, for better or worse, maybe for both, maybe for really bad for a short time, and then suddenly it flips to everything being wonderful. Is that what John is saying? Because it's an interesting idea that, going back to we have this wrong idea about the devil, and it's like, no, it's the devil who handles life the worst. That's basically what the devil is. The devil never goes to the cross because the devil wimped out too early. But whatever the devil faced that was even way better than that, he still sucked. The devil is like the one who gets everything he wants and then is still like having such a horrible time of it. And Christ is over there like beaten and carrying the cross, and he's still like having peace and joy and love, and he has a better time than Satan over there on the throne. It's like, yeah, you handled life the worst. Like, you couldn't have handled the cross worth anything, and you couldn't even handle everything being perfect for you. That's how horribly you can handle life. You're the worst. And it's like, how does the spirit survive? Is it really that strong just because it's willing to sell everything? Just because it's willing to sell its soul? It's that strong, really? And it's like, no, no, it just wants you to think it is. It needs you to think it is because you're strong, let's suppose. But actually, it's very weak. It's just that it tricks you into thinking that if you stop thinking about it, it'll get you. You know, that's its trick. You have to keep looking at hell, always back to hell, always back to hell. If you look away, that's the trick. I tricked you into not thinking about hell. Ha ha ha. It's like, why are you putting on this show of telling me that you're tricking me into not worrying about hell? Shouldn't I question whether you're being entirely honest about that? Shouldn't I assume that you're putting on a sort of play, a performance that is supposed to sort of be maximally convincing to somehow lead to the hell, but not actually? And if I look away and just feel like it's all peace and joy and love and like try to transform the world and I transform in the meanwhile. And so I, don't even need much and have a lovely time. And I'm simultaneously making the world a better place. And so for people who do need things to be okay, like Christ could theoretically, go through anything and just be like peace and joy and love, like having a good time, helping people, doing whatever he can do. And if he can't do anything, just peace and joy and love anyway. But so he has a good time no matter what, and then he ends up at the bottom in some ways, and the devil is like trying to convince you that because he ends up on the bottom, that's the wrong spirit, and he's just like having a good time the whole time. And the devil's like, no, no, don't measure it by whether you have a good time, measure it by whether you're low or high in the hierarchy. And that's the whole idea of ruling in hell versus serving in heaven. That you serve in heaven and you are in heaven, in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is spread out already upon the earth. The kingdom of heaven is not here or there. The kingdom of heaven is within. The kingdom of heaven, you can serve and be in the kingdom of heaven, or you can sell everything to rise up the ranks in hell, and then and you won't succeed because only one person can succeed. And the hope of being that one person is what drives everybody. But even if you actually succeeded and were that one person and you were somehow literally number one in the world, either according to some limited hierarchy you could tell yourself was the one that mattered. Like I really quite like Magnus Carlsen, but I wouldn't want to be the world chess champion and that be my life. It's not, it's a game, it's not big enough. And he displays excellence and points at something beyond himself by being so excellent. I mean, best of all time, man. By a ton. Really cool. And he's got such a personality. Like Hikaru, second place, more or less, he got a personality too. But you look at a couple of the top guys and be like, wow, if it weren't for so and so, these two people, one of these would be at the top. And it's like, they don't have the same personality. Like Magnus has really got the personality like none other. But yeah, like, okay, if I were the best in chess at the world, would I feel full of confidence? It's like I'm full of confidence because I can beat anybody at, as long as the game is chess, I always win. It's like, okay, what if the game is life? It's like, well, I sometimes win. It's like, cool. So how have you decided you're at the top of whatever hierarchy, which you won't be at the top at anyway. Nobody will except one. So either you can do that or you could literally be the very top of whatever the most important one was somehow, rule the whole world or something, and be the best artist and be just everything. Fine. Okay. You can rule in hell, and then it's still just worse for you. It wasn't even that you sacrificed it all for you, it was even worse for you than if you had just served in heaven and made the world a better place. And you put yourself on the throne and you're not that good. So you're just there for you because you wanted to be there just because it was at the top. Just that's it. Just because it was the top, you wanted to be at the top. Why you? Because you're you. And everybody else wanted to be there too. And you won because you sold literally everything, even having a good time. and now you're having a horrible time ruling in hell, and you're giving incompetence because you're having a horrible time. You're not going to be competent like that or intelligent. So it's just a self-destructive thing all the way, you know? And then you've got the opposite, Christ's integrative spirit. And in some sense, you could say these play themselves out in the body and say the body integrates and integrates and integrates. But then it keeps integrating more like mentally in some sense, but it starts disintegrating physically. And it goes on until you die. And then the whole collection of everything, even as you're approaching death, you're still adding this moment and this moment. It's all adding and adding and adding. So that's all accruing and integrating while your physical form is disintegrating. And then it finally hits a crossover moment where the body can no longer sustain itself. And so in that moment, the full accumulated experience goes limp. But presumably, when the body dies, it's not like every toenail and hair and your chest and your legs and every single part literally like bam, instantaneously they all go at the same time. It's like no, presumably somewhere it hits this crossover moment where it can no longer sustain itself and it seizes up and then it unseizes up in order. And that's your life flashing before your eyes. From the inside, your whole experience seizing up and then threshold. Yeah, threshold, the threshold from life to death. Threshold between chaos and order. And it's about the threshold, right? It's not about the chaos or the order. It's about the threshold because that's where you have the movement between them that is the processing. And that's what things are really made of in some sense, is the processing. And that's what leads to flow states, is that you do more efficient processing. And what leads to consistent chronic flow states is well integrated, excellent processing. And then the question is, when you find a way to get some good processing in and you can make sacrifices to ride it, what you can do that and become like a genius at one thing. But the alternative approach is to refuse to sacrifice anything in the end, to insist on everything being included and getting to be partially included in further development. And as a result, it doesn't plateau. It doesn't, like a firework, it doesn't like take off and explode and die. It's sustainable. It's sustainable and it's wholesome and it lasts and it's the best in the moment and the best later and the best for you and the best for everyone and the best for the world. And that's the hope. The hope is that we could somehow, sometime cross over from endless Molochian competition and display the swarm intelligence that we're capable of as a species, to find answers without even having to know where to look in advance, to put all of our insights together and integrate them and be an integrated body of humanity. Or maybe the only way to be a body of humanity successfully is to be a body of Christ. That's what the Christ spirit is supposed to do. But it has to, and maybe, I don't know, man, maybe this is the worst thing to say, but maybe the Christ spirit is supposed to integrate the Antichrist spirit. Or maybe it's the one thing that has to be ejected truly and completely. Or maybe interacting with it to reject it is a way of maintaining it and being in relationship to it. And so, yes, the end result is to sort of be eternally casting the devil into the fire. It's not that the devil's been there for a billion years and it's just like, wow, I gave out forever ago and this is just worse and worse. It's more like, no, it's just that the relationship to reality, the relationship to this part of reality is always that the Spirit of Christ integrates everything except casting out the devil. I don't know. Maybe. And even if that's true, then it's still also eternally the case that the Spirit of Christ is creating the devil. So, timeless considerations uh, start to seem relevant here. And then the whole question is all of this fascinating ideas, is it just good structures for flow states and processing, or is it true? I mean, the pattern of the mold spores is real, the pattern of evolution and universal Darwinism, the pattern of multiplicity resolving, the pattern of any dimension where multiplicity is possible, or at least some of them, running through differentiations, running through generations of differentiations, eventually coming across new patterns, and in many cases, transitioning from competitive to cooperative frames. That is a real pattern. Does that mean that Jesus was God? Does that mean there is a God? But if we all hope for this spirit of Christ, or for the shape it points at, and on the basis of that hope, we talk to each other and we say, hey, can we just keep talking until we both have faith that we can make the deal we should make? Whatever the best deal between us is, best for all of us, best for good. Because we want to be fast, we want to be really fast, we want to be efficient. And so I got to make 100 deals today, man. And so guess what? I'm not going to try and wring every last penny out of you. Let's make this fast and efficient and good for both of us. And if I can make 100 deals in a day by being good, then I can be 100, I can be 99 and a half steps ahead of somebody who spends all day making sure the one deal is like maximally to their favor. And that's an interesting idea, because in the Gospel of Thomas, the lost sheep story is slightly different. Chase, by the way, what is your relationship to religion and to Christianity in particular? Like, we riff on God, and I sort of signal that I'm figuring out what I think ontologically and so on. But of course, many people are just believers, or believers of one kind or another, or like, how are you? And we're talking about it, and we're talking about it, and this is amazing. This is so metamodern. We're talking about it, and we don't even know what the other really means. And yet it works. And I really like that. I think it's very important. That's how, like, Vervaeke and Pajot can talk. Even though Pajot believes in God, Vervaeke, I don't think so. Um, and yet somehow it's productive for both of them. Um, and that's so encouraging. It's so encouraging. But what was I saying? Is it real? Spirit of Christ? If we hope, that goodness is stronger, not because it gets a better deal. That's the trick, right? Take a picture of the good one in the game and take a picture of the one sacrificing everything to win the game, and tell me who looks cooler, man. It's the one who wins the game, obviously. But now watch the movie and notice that this movie is just winning that one game, and this movie is doing okay at a million games and doing something far more important and meaningful. And so the speed with error outcompetes the slowness with the brakes on. So postmodernism is these brakes, right? No, we can't proceed until we know what we're doing. We have to wait until we have a good plan. It's like, I don't know, man. Nobody's making the plan because, well, I don't know how to make the plan. Okay. So if we're in the situation of needing the plan, not knowing how to make the plan, I think we just got to start failing at making the plan. But we at least point at it. We point at it and fail. It's the same idea that goodness is good because you can point at it and fail, and you still get full credit, and forgiveness is on tap because that's its shape. That failures count and successes are even better. We only need one plan. Okay, what's the plan, man? Well, we only need one at a time. Yeah, we just need to do a stupid plan, but actually act on it, and then watch the interaction between the plan and the environment, and then build on that and learn, and know in advance that it's going to fail, and then plan in advance to use that failure to good end. I like to draw this connection to the body, because when the body uses the muscles so intensely that there's not enough oxygen to maintain them, they go into a perfectly normal but pseudo emergency protocol, and produce lactic acid as a byproduct, which is sort of a waste product, except not exactly. Because if you have good circulation, the lactic acid will then circulate back to the heart and be converted into a fuel. Now, you probably still lost some efficiency by switching over to anaerobic muscular function rather than air powered aerobic function. But you diminished the loss by a lot by recouping a lot of your gains by repurposing your waste product as fuel. And so, if you know in advance that you're going to fail, you can just plan in advance to build on failure. And then you won't be so afraid to fail. You'll be like, come on, here's it, where is it? And you're like, oh, I succeeded. Well, fine. Okay, where's the failure? Where's the failure? Oh, I actually succeeded. Fine. Okay, where's the failure? Then you fail. And instead of being like, oh, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Why? It's like, okay, here it is. And now we course correct and we use this to like figure out where to go next and bam. And so you don't go farther and farther and farther in one insistent direction. That is the Luciferian way. That might be going a bit far. But when you go more and more and more and more in one direction and ignore all the resistance pushing back, then even when you succeed, you build and build, and then you plateau. And then you just, even a huge company, they don't go up forever. Zigzag, exactly. So my computer just said, free up space to continue. But I assume I'm still just doing it fine, right? You can still hear me and see me and all that? Yeah. Okay, great. I hope so. I'm going to keep acting like it. Zigzag is exactly right. But the idea is that the zigs get zigger and the zags get zagger, precisely because you're willing to go back and forth between them. So I go as far as I can in this direction until I hit a wall. And then I purposefully bounce off the wall instead of crash into it. So I bounce off the wall because I'm looking for it and I'm hoping for it and I'm ready to embrace it and to use it. So I bounce off the wall and then I go back in the opposite direction and I ride it as far as I can. And then I find inevitably, eventually, resistance. And then I bounce off of that wall. And then I come back in this other opposite direction. Now, the opposite of an opposite are not always the same thing, but I come back in roughly the same direction. And when I reach that first wall, this time it's not a wall anymore. It's familiar territory. It's something that I've integrated. It's something that I've learned from, that I've been willing. Yeah. It's something that I've been willing to let teach me because I learned so much bouncing off it and going in the opposite trajectory. The whole journey is the learning, not just the bounce and not just the noticing the wall. So when I reach it this time, it doesn't stop me. It is me in some real sense now. And so I come past it and farther, and then I hit another wall. And at this point, you can see that we simply iterate on the process. It's constant and eternal course correction. But if you know you're going to sin, then you stop worrying about sin and just figure out how to deal with sin. And once you can deal with sin, it's not a problem. And the distinction between big and small sins becomes less relevant in some sense. So, yeah, this is the idea that the form of love that has tried to unify the world has failed so far, because that's not love. We have a intellectual understanding of love that misleads us greatly. And so love is supposed to harmonize the world, and it doesn't. But there is a version of love that could harmonize the world. And that form of love doesn't meet resistance and say, hey, fuck you for resisting love. Which, it just expands in this direction and meets resistance and then makes an enemy and seizes up and hits the brakes, and it expands in this direction and it seizes up and it expands in every direction, and it ends up with these borders, and it's just one more object among others competing to take over. It's not the intermediary layer between other objects. And so the spirit that's supposed to work here isn't one that grows and grows and grows and replaces things. No, it it sort of grows in all the in between spaces and facilitates handshakes between everything else. And so that's what I'm talking about with this integration, oscillating between opposites and saying you meet resistance, and instead of rejecting it, you love it with the real love this time, though, that learns and goes back and integrates it and goes farther the next time. That's the love that can just keep going. And it's wholesome because instead of ignoring its errors or even underestimating them, it explores them to the utmost. It briefly gives them a time in the sun and puts them in the conductor's chair, or it puts them under the spotlight, or you could even say they get to be god or king for the day. And then they're willing to be part of the group. You know, if the group ethos is everybody gets to be king for the day, maybe that's a group you want to be part of. And you learn so much when you take, you know, the loser that nobody likes and you make him king. Well, one thing that can happen is the king can be vindictive, like cancer, that says, if you're going to stop giving me nourishment in the body, then I'll just stop being part of the body and go back to looking out for my personal thing. And this isn't even a thing about you. It's not even about you. I'm just me growing like cells grow. But that's cancer for a multicellular organism. And the other thing that can happen is, you know, you think they're a loser, but they do things so differently and unexpectedly. So you learn from them as well as throw them a bone and have a good faith sharing with everybody. And you know, the desperation, no, we can't give it to this one because it's so important that the best one get it. It's like, yeah, in the short term, putting the best guy on top will always be better. And in the long run, giving everybody king for the day will keep going and keep going and keep going and grow and learn so much more that the best guy never knew. And in the end, even the least member of the kingdom of heaven is above the greatest of all those born of men, who is John the Baptist, according to Jesus. Even the least in the kingdom of heaven shall be called greater than this. Because being part of that process is enriching to everybody involved. And even in the meanwhile, you're still not the best. That's fine. But as a group, as a harmonized group, you're so much more powerful together that you can go toe to toe with far more, you know, formidable opponents. Like seriously, man. Like in hell, everybody has to watch everybody and enforce all the rules and make sure that you do it. That's not swarm intelligence. If you're part of a group where you genuinely believe everybody is out for the common good, and you've somehow come to terms with that, even if it means your self-sacrifice, I don't entirely know what to think about that because I don't know how to weigh personal identity and group identity. But there's no denying its efficacy, though. I mean, you get swarm intelligence when everybody just works together. And this is a little bit the idea of guerrilla warfare. And, you know, somebody, I think the Japanese in World War II said something like they couldn't invade America because there would be a rifle behind every tree and every something else. It was like, yeah, if they just everywhere you go, everybody spontaneously assembles to fight you. That's like a beehive. Like the bees are so stupid, but the hive is just like, oh my goodness. So this is also the idea in Ender's Game. In Ender's Game, it's humanity against the aliens, and the aliens are swarm intelligence, and they show this crazy, powerful, coordinated, chaotic way of moving their ships for battle. Um, and the humans can't match that. But then the genius Ender learns and learns and learns, and he has his subordinates, and he teaches them and he integrates with them, and he understands them intimately, and he loves them, and he gives them commands, and they direct sub portions of the fleet. And then what his teacher says is, look at how you guys move. It looks like an enemy alien swarm with the chaos and the amazing coordination. And it shows an inventiveness, uh, an innovation innovativeness, a creativity, a spontaneity, a sort of free will um, that was beyond what the aliens had. So by somehow, yes, learning the intuition, and the flow states and the symbiosis and the coordination, but mixing that with the whole human spirit idea, the individual, that somehow maybe that is the best organism. It's not king for a day. It oscillates between king for a day and best on top or something. It's like hierarchy, no hierarchy. Hierarchy, no hierarchy. Everybody's the same. Everybody's sorted by competence. Everybody's the same. Everybody has their part to play in the body of Christ. Where's the hearing and the smelling and the seeing and the touching and the head and the so forth? Or maybe it's just the body of Christ and it's always everybody has their one role to play and nobody gets to be king for a day. But the smelling gets to be king for a day in some sense, right? When it's your time, every part of the body gets its time in the sun. When the situation asks for it, that part of you comes out. And because it waits for the right time to come out, it can be supported by every other part of you. And so it gets to come out in its best light. And so if you make a godly handshake with the 7 deadly sins, then you can get much more pleasure out of well integrated, sophisticated consumption of food, say, than you will get out of uninhibited gluttony. By agreeing to be told to stand down when the time is right, gluttony can be trusted to be allowed to go all out unless for some reason it needs to be called back. It can go all out, guilt-free, and the whole body can support it and unify behind that purpose for a moment until the moment comes that an error signal appears, and now we give that one the attention and we learn from it and we go back in the other direction. So there's this sort of handshake where everything gets more of what it wants by contributing to the whole, by taking its turn, and everything gets its time in the sun. And its time in the sun, serving in heaven, will always be better, even if it successfully forced everything else to let it make all the calls and rule in hell. And then the gluttony would still be far less enjoyable than a sophisticated integration of everything. You don't get, the food doesn't hit the same way. When you're in like a pseudo psychedelic high flow state, then it really hits. And when it hits with the right narrative context, it hits better. And that's what's missing in Buddhism. So I got to go. But it's been great talking with you. Human is a pyramid. Humanity is an ocean of pyramids, like iron, like metal, where how you can magnetize metal by hitting it if it's oriented within a field, an electromagnetic field. So in the field, you hit the iron, and then the pieces get jostled around, and then because they're all within the context of the field, they tend to settle back down, oriented in the same direction. And so people say, some wooey people will say, people are like crystals. And I'm like, no. People are like metals. But what most people don't know is that metals are crystals, but they're like living crystals. They're ductile, flexible crystals. Because crystals mean all the pieces are in the same oriented lattice work. They're all in this rigid structure. Metal does the same thing, except the particular orientation adapts. So like humans are like metal, or can be like metal, if they have really high flow states and excellent integration. And then maybe the species can like do the same thing and like send out a signal, and then all of us orient toward it and like give it the necessary work, and then the next signal comes up and we're willing to orient toward it. And maybe we only give it the slack, maybe we're busy with our own lives, but when the signal comes, we work. And it's a funny idea, but I guess if we all were willing to focus on our own lives and then say like, okay, one day, all next week, we're all simultaneously going to do whatever we can for the energy crisis or something. there'd probably be a bunch of things we could do that would have permanent effects if we just knew we could get everybody coordinated. So that's a very interesting comparison. If the pyramids, the pyramids have a polarity, they have a point and a base, like a negative and a positive pole in a iron atom. So yeah, the idea that you could point all the pyramids within an ocean, and when the blood suffuses a part of the body, the electromagnetics can pass much more easily throughout that area of the body, just like salt water conducts electricity better. I think doing meditation in water is just way easier. And salt water is probably extra good. And the ocean, even with its, you could say it's distracting, or you could say it forces you to be in relationship and not to do the Buddhist detachment, but to be in a narrative relationship, maybe even. Um, so anyway, so I'm on my way out, but really great talking, man. And see you next time. Or at 6. I'll be on at 6. Yeah. See ya.